Larry, Fort Worth Memories Museum and Group. And today is Tuesday, Hometown Heroes, and it's the three of us. And I guess we're talking about the Hawaii trip with Mr. Graves.
That's
We
right.
are.
That's
Yeah.
right. It was a trip of a lifetime, wasn't it?
It was. It certainly was. Triple. You can't even imagine until you go there with a World War II vet, as they're going there for the first time since they went there during the war. It's something to see.
And this was all done by Black Rifle Coffee Company?
So it was a partnership in conjunction with Beyond the Call, which is a small organization whose mission is basically to, keep the stories alive of the World War II veterans. Tracy Hunter lives in Hawaii. She used to live here in Denton. And so we, as Roll Call, came to know Tracy because if you go to our website and you watch one of our videos, the one that features Don Graves and Carmen Giese and a few of our other vets, Tracy is the one that produced that piece for us. And so we came to know her through her work with us as an organization. And she arranges trips. She finds sponsors and host families in Normandy and all over the place in Europe to take World War II vets back, her organization Beyond the Call. And they also work the Pearl Harbor trips, New Orleans. So she takes veterans, World War II vets, and tapes their stories as well so she can continue to share those World War II stories, as we all have talked about a lot. You know, we are losing these guys at a rather fast pace because they're not young people anymore. You know, even the ones that enlisted, like Jack Stowe at 15 years old, they're up there in age.
Probably about 94, 95 would be the youngest one, don't you think?
Yeah, we have a couple that are 94-ish that came in right at the tail end, or again, there have been a lot of people who found a way to fudge the old birth certificate in World War II and came in at Jack is not the only one. Not only him and his brother came in at 15 years old, but a lot of people did that because they just wanted to serve. They loved this country so much.
And the economy was pretty bad too.
Yes. Yeah, coming out of
that
the
was
Depression.
the source of income.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Probably $21 a month or something like that is what maybe they started at. It was pretty low. I know whenever we went in, it was probably, I think, $192 a month.
$189 for me.
Yeah, I made more money than you do because I got $192.
So how was Hawaii? Was there a lot of people there from all over?
There were. So, I talked about Tracy and Beyond the Call, but Black Rifle, they paid for this trip. So Tracy linked up with Black Rifle. So Beyond the Call and Black Rifle came together, and she pitched the idea to him. She had met some of the folks at another event, and they loved what she was doing. So they said, if you've got anything going on that you think that we'd be good to get involved with, let us know. And so she reached out to them to send 3 World War II veterans to Pearl Harbor. And that's how they got involved. And they sent a crew over of 4 people who were with us the whole entire time. They shot video. They shot photos. I mean, they were there from the time we got off the airplane to the day that we left. So they were there to capture all of the moments.
So they were with Black Rifle Coffee Company.
They were, yes, Black Rifle Coffee Company. And not only were they there and doing that, but they brought boxes of Black Rifle coffee of different kinds. And as we went to different places, and people were really helpful to us and, were there to be great hosts, they were passing out bags of Black Rifle coffee. So there was a lot of folks that got to experience getting some coffee from these folks on top of it. And with the exception of 1, 3 out of the 4 people with them were all veterans. And one of them, I'm hoping to get up here in the near future. His name is Clint. And he is a double amputee. And he is just...
Is he a veteran?
He is. He was 19 years in Marine when he came across a little explosive device that didn't like him very much. So 19 years he was in that long, and I won't go into too much of detail because I really want to get him up here. He
Sure.
lives near San Antonio. All these guys came from San Antonio, but boy, I'll tell you, they were just absolutely fabulous, and it'd be great to get at least Clint's story on and get him on here on Hometown Heroes, because he was just great. And we took some pictures of him and Don together at some places, and even where we went, the places that we went, especially the Marine Corps base, the Punch Bowl where the young Marines were, they really embraced him just as well as the 3 veterans of World War II that we brought. So it was pretty interesting.
Was there any people from Japan, military people there at this reunion?
There were, and I don't know if we'll show the picture or not as we get into one of the times we were at the Pearl Harbor Museum. There was a group of Japanese military. They were young, and they had been at the Pearl Harbor Museum. I think it was either the day before or the day after this. It was probably the day before the ceremony, and they were outside, and they actually took a picture with Don, and he just chatted with them, and they really were so gracious.
Well, I've seen pictures of, there's somewhere in the States where there's some now Japanese kamikaze pilots that survived it, and they're all in a group. They meet every week. Mm-hmm. And the American guy said, we were brutal enemies, but now and in fact, didn't you tell me at the very end, Fisk Hanley and
Well,
and I would have never thought that.
Yeah, it was years before the very end.
Yeah.
He met him out at General Dynamics.
Yeah,
he was an engineer out there.
It was definitely, wasn't it in the 70s or
I think
something?
so.
It was
I think
early on.
Mark has met that Nagazi or somebody like that.
Yep.
Because every time I talk to Fisk, and you even mentioned Japan, and I mean that was a no-no.
Yeah.
He had a rough time over there.
No, yeah, he was in. Wasn't he scheduled to be executed?
Several times.
Yeah.
But, Japan has become one of our strongest allies.
Sure.
And, they're right over there in the middle of a lot of stuff around China and Russia.
Oh, yeah.
And so.
Well, and a lot of people don't realize, they don't study the history. The United States cut off 90% of Japan's oil. I mean,
Right.
What are you going to do?
Right.
If somebody came over here and said, hey, guess what? Y'all are going to be able to have 10% of your gas. Mm-hmm. Well, we'd have to do something too. So, I mean, I'm not saying we gave them, but I mean.
Well, and if you, I'm no historian, so I'm no Mark Donahue. I don't spout it off the way that he does. But if you listen to the stories and you read the stories, Japan was wanting to take over,
yes,
a sixth of the world.
Oh,
they
yes.
wanted to take over a huge chunk
All
of the
of
world. And part of what we did, and, FDR, to get elected, of course, said, no, we're not going to get into war.
Right.
We're not going to send our guys to war.
He promised.
Right. But, when part of the way that he tried to avoid getting into war was to cut off the oil. That was a big part of it. And so, of course, one thing led to another, and the Japanese planned that bombing for a long time. And it's really interesting that when we went out to the Marine base,
Was that Kaneohe Bay?
yes.
Yeah.
And when they were even talking about the history of how the radar was really new at the time.
Brand
right?
new. Brand new.
So, and it was untested. It was one of those, things that, it'd be great if it works. Of course, it didn't work well with the mountains, but there were a couple of radar men along the way that actually said, hey, there's something on the radar.
B-17s, the
And
guy
they
looked at it and
assumed,
said,
right.
he explained it away. He said,
Right.
oh, there's B-17s coming in. And the guy, not the movie script, but I read a book that was from that guy's son. He said, I think it's a little bigger than B-17s coming in. This is a whole damn wave of planes coming in.
Right.
And the guy said he dismissed it. Everybody was They're not going to come over here and bomb us.
Right. And the fact that we moved this entire fleet from California into Pearl Harbor,
Right.
the Japanese had that information, and so they had a plan, and in that first wave. So when we were at the ceremony the day of, on December 7th, at the time that the first wave came through, they sent through a group of F-22s that came over and did a flyover. So it was very emotional, and there probably weren't. The front row was the only row that had any World War II vets. So very few compared to the year before, of course, because Best Defense alone sent 63 the year before, 10 of those being roll call. But the group that was there this year, of course, it wasn't the 80th. There wasn't a lot of pomp and circumstance, but still, there probably weren't 10 or 15 World War II vets. And of those, there was 3 or 4 maybe Pearl Harbor survivors. And one of them was with our group, and he goes pretty much every year. He's out of Arizona.
Was he 100 years old, 101?
He turned 101 last week on the 13th. Wow. And he signed 300 books. Jack was really something. And Jack was he was actually working because, of course, that morning a lot of the big wigs, they went off, they were playing golf, they're relaxing, they're doing whatever they're doing. And nobody expected anything on a Sunday morning. Can you imagine? You're just kind of, and when you're there and you're looking at these hangars and you're looking at the strafe marks and all the things that you can look at to show you this is where these bullets actually hit. This is where, the glass, they have the glass was still with the holes in it.
Really?
And you look at that and you think these guys were just going about their business.
Sure.
It was a lazy Sunday morning, beautiful weather, sunny day. You just think about it. You just imagine it. And all of a sudden,
you're attacked.
Right. And so Jack was in a hangar working, and they were building a drainage ditch between 2 hangars. It hadn't been complete. It wasn't being used yet, but they were building this ditch, this system in there, some drainage. And one of the guys in there, when the attack happened, said, "Hey, let's go." And 3 of them went, and they jumped in that drainage ditch and just barely missed getting hit. And it was when he talked about it, he was clear. It was like it just happened yesterday. He would tell you exactly what was going on, exactly what he was thinking, and he'll tell you that the emotions, the anger, the fear, we need to go get him, and destroyed all the planes. So between the hangars they had outside, of course, we all know they destroyed so much in that first wave, and then the second wave took out even more. But he talks about all these brand new planes they just took delivery of, and the vast majority of them were destroyed. And his commanding officer said, "Get my plane ready," and they readied his plane so he could take off. So Jack was even involved. He jumped on one of the planes to go with the attack on Midway. So he was involved in that battle.
And the Japanese only lost 24 planes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing.
It's crazy.
And Jack, what branch? Well, he's in the Navy, right?
He was Navy.
And I didn't know until the other day. I was revisiting it because I knew you were going to come on with this. Most of the losses out of our 2,400 or whatever it was were on the Arizona and the other ship that went down.
Oklahoma.
Yeah, so that was the. Did y'all go to that Arizona?
We did.
That's got to be real emotional.
It is.
Yeah. So we get off the plane in Hawaii, and we're met by a small contingent of young Marines.
Wow.
Who are there to greet.
Are these are kids?
Yeah. So if you don't know about the young Marines,
Oh, I do.
You do.
yes. So for those watching or listening, the young Marines, they're just amazing. And these kids, I think they must start them out 6, 7 years old. Some of these guys were pretty young, and girls, but they go all the way up through high school, And these were some of the most impressive young people I've seen. And we have young Marines here too. And when you see them out on base, when we would see them on base, they're always very disciplined young people. But they met us at, when we got out of security, they met us and welcomed everybody, the whole lay thing and everything.
You got laid there.
Yes.
I mean, she got the lay put on her.
Right.
That's what I meant.
Yes. And they were just incredibly welcoming. So we get to the hotel. The next day, we went to the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum. And that's when the journey kind of began with all of the folks and hearing the stories. So the first thing that we did was we went and they had General Brady there, the Medal of Honor recipient. He was originally this was scheduled to be a trip with Don and Woody. And the museum was going to sponsor them to come in, and Woody was going to be on this panel, but of course we lost Woody. So General Brady was there, and he was interviewed, and they talked to him. And then Jack was there, so Jack shared some of his story, and then he did some book signings. And General Brady, of course, always did some book signings too. And I think that night was the only time that we saw him. So that evening, they had a gala. And so Don got to meet some folks and kind of get to know and walk. We walked around the museum, which was pretty impressive in itself. Bush's plane, George H.W.'s plane, was in the museum.
Wow.
And so we visited there for a little bit, and then that evening they had a gala, which was the museum's big fundraiser for the year. And they brought in all kinds of people, and Don and Carl. So Carl Flinner was everybody pretty much knows Don Graves.
Carl, we just met him, didn't we?
Carl is relatively new to roll call. He just came about. We met him through Lorna, who met him at another World War II event, and found out he lived right here in Grand Prairie, right in the Mansfield area, and said, hey, you need to come out to roll call. So she brought him out to roll call, and his son Clint. And so we got to know Carl, and when we had a space available and we found out he was in the Pacific, he was 11th Airborne, then we invited Carl to join us. So Carl and Don and Jack were the three that were there with Beyond the Call. And Carl, it was just really incredible. It was probably the first time Carl got this much attention, and he's got a great sense of humor, and he can hear. So I didn't have to scream real loud. But so when these guys get to this event that night, it's a dress up kind of a thing, and they had General Brady and then all the World War II guys, which were basically our three. I don't think there were any other ones there. They got introduced and brought out first and across the stage, and everybody, of course, applauded, and the standing ovation and all of that. In that, what they do at that benefit that night is they raise money so that they can continue to educate young people. So they have a lot of different programs. They raised nearly $500,000 that night. It was amazing, and it was a great event. And so that was the start of it. And then the next day, we went out again, and I'm trying to remember if that was the day we went to. I got to look at my notes because I can't remember. It's been a couple of weeks. So. Yep. So the next day is when we did the tours of the Arizona and Missouri. So when we first the first day we hit the museum. So as you come across the bridge, of course, you could see where Don says, right there or underneath that bridge, that's where when I was coming in, as they prepared to go into Iwo Jima, as they were coming in, he said, I came right up underneath where that bridge is right there. And that's the first time he had seen it since World War II.
Wow. He
had been to Hawaii one other time, but it was a different island. So he wasn't even on this island. He hadn't been to the museum. He hadn't been to the Arizona. Carl had never been back there. And so when we took the three of them, too, and I'm trying to see, that picture that he's showing right there. That was on the Missouri, and that was the spot. So the little circle, the picture you showed right before that, where he had the little circle on the ship, that was where the signing happened to the end of the war with Japan, and it's still right
With MacArthur?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So right there, that right there. And the guys so they didn't stay on the Missouri long, because they were pretty wore out by this time from already a lot of stuff going on, and it was real warm. But just imagine, they're thinking about it, and they're thinking here, because I would ask them both, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What as you're going through this, and it was just a lot of emotion about being
I'm sure
right there and remembering so vividly what they were feeling in that day when they found out that the war was over. So Carl and Carl has just got such a great sense of humor. He would talk about, sometimes there were times when somebody just wasn't acting right and they needed to be corrected a little bit, and maybe his gun would just go off and he would not realize that his gun had went off, and he might just barely send a shot past one of our own guys. And then if it was an accident, he'd always say, sorry, Joe. Sorry, Joe. He had such a great sense of humor. But when we were coming in, as we got off the plane and were driving in to go to the hotel, Carl was looking up at the trees. He got the big, tall palm trees. And he starts telling us a story about that the Japs would, put their guns, their machine guns and everything on their backs, and they would somehow climb up those trees. And he said, and he'd look at a tree, he'd be like, something right about those branches. Something's not quite right here. And if he didn't think something was right, he just shot. That was his MO. He would just shoot. And if it was one of ours, sorry, Joe. But he shot one time, he shot up there and 4 Japs fell out of the tree.
4 of them.
Wow.
4 of them fell out of the tree. But this guy had 8 combat jumps in World War II.
In the Pacific.
In the Pacific.
Well, there was a lot of those Japanese on some of those islands that 30 or 40 years later, they've still found them.
Yeah.
Right.
And those people still thought the war was going on.
Exactly.
I mean, that's kind of how could you believe that? They've lived off the land for 25, 30 years.
Yeah, they were trained well. But I don't know if you have any of the pictures of the Arizona handy, but so when we got to go on the Arizona, as you come into the park, the Park Service does just a fabulous job. We met some really incredible people. And we met this one young lady even the day before, really tall, real pretty young lady. And Don's like, you must be an athlete, and he's talking to her, and then her husband comes up, and he's tall, and he looks like an athlete, and he's in the military. He's, I can't remember, I think he was Navy. But they both are divers. Yeah, he's Navy because he's a Navy diver. And she's a diver, and she was telling us that one of the things that she does for the Park Service is that when a member of the Arizona, somebody who was on the Arizona when the attack happened, that survived it, when they pass, if they wish to, they can be cremated, and then they can have their remains taken back down and put in the Arizona. And
wow.
That's what she does. She dives down and she puts their remains in the Arizona. And that was just really so overwhelming to hear, to think about that sacred. And she really took it as a sacred honor that she had the ability to be able to do this for these people. Because, Jack was telling us when the attack was happening and he could hear those guys and see those guys. And he said, and they would try to get off the boat and they'd jump in the water and the water was on fire because of the oil. And, and he said, you just can never forget the sights and the sounds of what happened when the Arizona was attacked. Mm-hmm. So when you go out there, when you prepare to go out there, so they took us kind of separately into a separate area to wait to go out on the boat. Now that we didn't have the boat to ourselves and we didn't have the Arizona tour, the memorial to ourselves, but they took us out separate to a separate holding area and then had us in the back of the room when they were briefing the big crowd going on the boat out to the Arizona memorial. And before he finished, he said, and there are 3, survivors of World War II in the back, and of course everybody stood and did the standing ovation. Then they took them out, and as you're going out, they tell you this is a somber place, and you make sure your phones are on silent. Make sure that you are, not doing a lot of loud talking and that sort of
respectful
stuff. Right, just be very respectful, and also that they were going to take these 3 first into the front where they have the wall and where you can actually read the names.
I think we've got some pictures of that.
Yeah. So when we get out there and we get the 3 of them in that room, and they're standing in front of the wall, and just the massive number of names. And one of our members, Bucky Gear, our roll call guys, he said he has a distant relative whose name is up there, and I wish I'd have known that when I was there because I'd have taken a picture of it. But there's the 3 of them.
Don and them.
Don, Jack, and Carl. And on that wall is a picture of Harmon Moody's brother's name. So
Is that the 2,400?
That's the ones that were killed on that.
Man,
on the Arizona.
Massive.
On the Arizona.
Oh, just the Arizona?
Just the Arizona.
So that's 1,194 or something.
And there's the Marines over there in the right. So that comes up a little bit later in another return trip to the Arizona. So while we were there, they were each given something to lay there at the memorial. And so one by one they did that. But I did take a picture because Harmon Moody, one of our other World War II vets, he was on the, was he on the?
Remember.
Oh, heavens. I can't remember what boat Harmon was on. Harmon was on the USS John Weeks, and he actually experienced a kamikaze attack in 45. But his brother was killed on the Arizona, and I took a picture of his name. And at the luncheon we just had, I said, Harmon, I want to show you something. And I showed him the picture, and it was really touching for him to see that. But it was a very, very somber, of course, to be there in this place where so many people lost their lives. And to, and I don't think I think Don had tears in his eye. I think we all had tears in our eyes just at the magnitude. And then we came out from there, and the folks with the Park Service had pedals. And so in between there it's like a hole. It's like a reflecting pool. Right, that you can actually look down. You can see parts of the Arizona that are under there. And that there were people that they're still there. We try to get Harmon to go, but he said, I just, it's not something that I'm really up to do. But we dropped, so each of them, one by one, dropped the pedals. You said a little prayer, you drop the pedals down into the water. And it was incredibly emotional. And then as they were leaving from there, of course, the people that were there then to go forward and go into the other room were stopping to, thank those 3 and shake their hand and just really show their love and appreciation.
Whenever you look down on that ship, was there still oil seeping up? Because I was there about 40 years ago, and it amazed me that the oil was still seeping out of the ship.
There's still a little, it's not as pronounced, but there is still a little bit of oil seeping up. And you can see as you come across, they have markers for where the other ships were that got hit. And then, of course, the Oklahoma that also sunk. So you got the capsized remains of the different ships.
It was
But
horrific. You know, I read a story not too long ago. Some of the nurses there, one of them had, one of the sailors had proposed to her. And so that Sunday morning, her and the other nurses, they were kind of having a little tea and, you know, congratulations to her and having a little party. And then the attack started. And her future husband was killed.
yeah.
And I mean, it's just hard to believe. And it tells in that story that there was sailors and soldiers playing baseball and, you know, just a regular Sunday morning.
Right.
And then just unprovoked, here it came.
It was Dale Robinson. He was at Schofield Barracks when it
Right.
got attacked.
Right.
And the Japanese, several of the people that were pretty smart said they never took into consideration that part of the attack would uproar the Americans, that
Right.
15-year-olds, 14-year-olds were signing up, hey, let's go. And they didn't know.
Yeah.
That's what did them in.
Yeah, and they pretty much thought that once, because of course Navy was our biggest, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, that was where all of our military might was in our Navy. So they thought if they could take out our Navy, then we wouldn't get involved and we wouldn't affect them going and doing whatever all the other things they wanted to do to take over more parts of the world, right? So they had a master plan. They actually had a third wave planned, but they didn't go through with it. But just to be there and to see the site. So when we went to the Marine Corps base the next day after the Arizona, so we go out to the Marine Corps base, and they have a site, and I know I sent a picture to Rick. I don't know if we have it here, but it's of the spot where a Japanese pilot died, hit. So this spot was marked. There's a little memorial placard there where he died and where he crashed his plane, and they interred him with the Americans and they treated him the same way that they treated the Americans, very respectfully. And then when the war was over, they returned his remains back to his home country. But it's just the difference in the way that we are. But no, the Japanese thought we were weak. We were not going to get involved in the war. We were more worried about industry. They had no idea that they woke, as history tells it, the sleeping giant.
And you know, there was that mistake, and then Hitler had put Erwin Rommel in charge of defending the beaches. And Rommel, it's in his book, he says, if we don't stop them here and send them back to the boats, we're done. And he was right. He said, if they get inland, we're finished. And of course, Hitler wouldn't hear of any of that.
Yeah, and so you have all of these men now, right, going off to war because of Pearl Harbor. So you got them going, like you hear Don tell the story, you know, the morning after when, you know, FDR comes on and makes the speech. And he runs down to the recruiting station, and he's not old enough. And a lot of them weren't old enough. Seriously, 14 and 15-year-olds were finding ways to fudge birth certificates so that they could go and be in the war. It was that important to them that they wanted to go. And we had so many people off at war that and we were building stuff like crazy, right? I think I was listening to one story about the Jeep came about during this time. And they were producing, I can't remember how many of those. It was hundreds of thousands of them they produced in no time. And how did they do that? And guess who we got to sit with at the celebration and at the parade celebration, or the commemoration? We were with a bunch of Rosie the Riveters.
Rosie, I was going to say that.
Oh my gosh, they were amazing. And I'm talking to these women. And as I'm talking to them, because at first I thanked the ones that I was talking to, because they paved the way for me to be able to eventually join the military, right? If it had not been for, in our military, our waves and all of that too, because we have 50 World War II veterans still on our books at roll call. Not all of them come to the luncheon. Our oldest is Ernie LaCroix at 103. He'll be 104 in February. all the way through to our youngest, who's in their 93, 94 range, and those are the ones that lied more or less about
Sure.
their age or came in right at the tail end. But we still have 3 females, and
Tippy's
they
one
were
of them, and her birthday's coming
and
up.
Tippy just had a birthday.
Did she?
just
Okay.
turned, or
100
no,
and-
it is coming up.
101, 102.
102.
Yeah.
And she was a machinist. So these women were not, the 3 that we have were not nurses. They were actually doing other jobs. But the Rosie the Riveters, these women, when I'm talking to them and they're talking about, before the war, they were housewives and
Sure.
moms, and they didn't know anything about producing things. They didn't know anything about machines and sheet metal, and here they are. They're learning to weld and work with sheet metal, and just
But they also started earning an income because they had
they
never
did
worked. Back then, the women were housewives.
right.
And so then they said, hey, this is pretty neat. We get, and they had places where they could take the kids and somebody would babysit the kids, and they got to earn a living.
And our country came together.
Came together.
And everybody did the part that they needed to do.
Yeah.
For,
My
A lot of
grandmother-
sacrifice.
I remember her telling me when I was asking her, I said, so when Grandpa went to war, what happened? She said, well, we had a drive for pots and pans and all of that, and it was over on North Main. And she said, so I kept a big pot for the beans and a skillet. She said everything else went, and she said we were going to take it over there in wagons. It would have been an all-day trip, but they had a truck come by. And so she said, and then she said, young man, jack up my husband's car and take the wheels off because we needed the rubber. And I said, well, what if, she said, I didn't think he would come back. But she said, I was willing. And she said, when he came back, I said, so when Grandpa came back, was he upset? She said he was just thankful to be alive.
Right.
And we finally got some more wheels for the car.
Yeah, a lot of sacrifice. Everybody sacrificed. There were limits. There were rations.
Can we do that today?
Ration
No way.
cards. People were willing to give, and they didn't have much. So think about how little
didn't
they
have
had.
anything, yeah.
But they were willing
they
to
just
give
come
up.
out. They had just come out of the depression. I mean, it
Right.
was still going on. I
Right.
mean, it wasn't like all of a sudden the economy's great, but
Right. And so the factories cranked up. The innovation and the way that the country was in terms of having the ability to get these factories up and running in no time, and they worked around the clock, just go. So these women were those women that were the first ones to go in there when the war happened, and they were just amazing.
And did you know those munition plants? I've told this story before. The first 16 months of the war, we lost more women in factories than we did soldiers dying. We lost like 16,000 women in factories because these tracer rounds, it was just black powder. And in one instance, they said, all right, it's lunchtime, let's all go. And a lady got her purse and knocked over a deal, and it wiped out that whole factory. So they really sacrificed everything.
and then we have the WASP, the Women's Army
Yes.
Service Pilots,
Right.
and they are the ones that did the testing of the airplanes and shuttled airplanes around, and really paved the way for women in aviation. So.
Yeah, they did. And, so I find all this history so fascinating because my grandson, when my grandson Connor, the 9-year-old, when his mama told him that I was going to Pearl Harbor, he's like, well, what's Pearl Harbor? So then she had to get out some stuff to start explaining to him. So now he's got a curiosity. He wants to know more. What was
good.
Pearl Harbor? But these kids don't learn any of this history
Oh,
in
no,
school. It's
no.
like a little paragraph or something about Pearl Harbor. There should be more. They should understand how we got into World War II and what sacrifices we made. So go back to the Arizona. So when the next day after, there's all kinds of stuff we're doing. But at one point, they were doing the Park Service was doing interviews with the guys. And so when they got to Don and they were doing his interview, as they got toward the end of it, they said, is there anything, that you would have done that you haven't done yet? And he said, well, there is one thing. I have unfinished business. And they said, what do you mean you have unfinished business? Well, he said, when we were on the Arizona, I should have done a slow salute. That list of Marines, that's where he stood, that list of Marines that was on the Arizona. And so they said, if you want to do that, we'll make that happen. So the next day they took him back out there in between different things. And so he and I went out there. And I said, Don, I'll do it with you. So Don and I went out. We stood in front of that list of Marines, and we did a slow salute. And then,
didn't you send a picture of that?
I did.
Yeah, because I posted that on our group.
Yeah. And he got a kick out of it afterwards because he said the corporal gave a senior master sergeant an order. So he thought that was pretty funny. But that was important to him to finish that. So we had the day at the Marine base, and those guys were amazing as they came out and they told the history and they talked about the buildings and what was happening when it was happening. But at the front gate, when we first got there, at the front gate, they had on the board, as they do for all gates, the little messages that pop up, and they had the welcome for the 3 guys. And then we went out there and we saw where some of the landing craft were coming in and out there. And then we went at the front gate. They had that memorial, just the Iwo Jima one. And so they had a bunch of security force people, Marines, that were out there. And Don got to sit with them and talk to them and take pictures. But all 3 of our guys were out there, and we got pictures of them at that. And that was real emotional for Don, too, because, of course, that he was there. And
he was a kid.
He was an 18-year-old kid on
he was
Iwo
a kid.
Jima when he came up Mount Suribachi as they were raising the flag.
Yeah.
And so here's this memorial, and he said it's even more beautiful than the one in D.C. And he just thought it was fabulous. And these folks were just, the Marines, the young Marines, they were all just so amazing. And we went, the next day we were down at the Punch Bowl, the National Cemetery, and they were doing a wreath laying. Yeah, so there's that picture of Don in front of the monument.
Yeah.
And that was a great picture. In fact, that's one that I want to get made because he wants to put that on his wall. So I'm going to get that one made for him.
Let me edit that and kind of crop some stuff out, and we'll get some of those pictures made. And
yeah, he definitely, that was one that he wanted. He wants that one. There's not many pictures that Don says I want a copy of, but that was the one he wanted. And then we were at the Punch Bowl for the wreath laying with the young Marines, and these kids were so impressive. And the young man that spoke is their Young Marine of the Year for the entire Young Marines nationally. Wow. He was 18 years old, and he spoke that day at the Punch Bowl, and then later at the parade. He spoke, and what an amazing young man. And then he took all 3 of the vets. They had another young Marine that was taping them. And all 3 of them, they took them to a separate area there at the Punch Bowl, and they recorded them. So that was really, to see the youth, these young people from all over the country were there. I mean, all over the country were there at the Punch Bowl.
And they're proud of that. All of my kids were either young Army, young Marines, or Sea Cadets.
Yeah, it was amazing to just see their behavior and to see how they were. And so we did that event, and then of course the morning of the actual commemoration, as you wait and you know that the timer is ticking down, and that's
7:52 a.m.
And that's,
or is it 8:52?
7:52.
7:52.
Yep. And so they went through that ceremony, and some of them went back out to the Arizona, and we didn't because we'd already been out there a couple of times. But that evening at the parade, this really, really, really touched
I've watched
me.
those videos, and it's so impressive to see all the people and y'all pushing them down in
Tracy,
wheelchairs.
yeah, Tracy said she's never seen that many people out to watch the parade. And, they had marching bands and dance teams and, groups from all over the country here to march in this parade.
From Hawaii.
No.
They're from all over.
All over. Young people coming in because of Pearl Harbor. And as we're taking them down the parade route, I turned around to take a picture, and that's a picture of Carl and his son. Yes, yeah, that's Carl Flinner and his son Clint, and so we're taking him down there, and I turned to take a picture and to see how they were doing, because sometimes they'd get ahead of us, sometimes behind us, because we're on one side, they're on the other side, and I looked back, and Carl had tears running down his face.
Yeah, it's very emotional.
And I asked his son, because his son had told us earlier in the trip that his dad really didn't talk a lot about his service. And I asked him after he'd been through a couple interviews, because Black Rifle also did quite an interview in the actual hangar, one of the actual hangars that was there during the attack. And I said, did you learn a lot about your dad that you didn't know before? And he said, yeah, I sure did. And I said, it gives you new appreciation, doesn't it? But I don't think Carl has ever had that much attention paid to him. Like he didn't know how to react or what to expect. And just the emotion, to see that emotion on his face. He was grateful for all of the folks that came out, and it was so somber for him. But, I mean, to turn and look at him and the tears just rolling down his face. When these young people are reaching out and stopping him to shake it. I had to keeping both sides moving, because everybody wanted to shake their hands. One's on one side of the street, one's on the other. People want to shake their hands. Well, they're holding up the rest of the parade. But so we had to keep pushing them to, okay, we got to move them along. But that was how much the public wanted to shake their hands. And this picture is Clint, the Marine vet right there, and his daughter. And his daughter really, she just loved on those guys and just really took a shine to Carl. She just something. They brought her to everything that we did. His wife and him brought her to all of these events. So this young woman, when she grows up, is going to have a way different appreciation for what the sacrifices that have been made for this country. And every young person needs to understand the sacrifices that were made by every generation of warrior, from World War II to Korea. We don't hardly ever talk about Korea.
Never.
And of our World War II vets, 2 of them served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Many of them served in both, but Ray Doss and John Wilhite served in all 3. John is 99 years old. Served in all 3 conflicts. But we don't think about the sacrifices made through each of these generations, and you think about it, after World War I, people didn't want to go to war, which is why it took us so long to get back into World War II. Then right on the heels of World War II, you got Korea. And then right on the heels of that, I mean, we were already starting in Vietnam. People don't realize that we were starting in Vietnam back in the 50s.
Oh, yeah, 58,
it wasn't something that just happened for a few years in the 60s and the early 70s.
No.
It started long before that, but our people don't understand. And then the just ugliness of Vietnam that you guys know better than anybody. And I was a teenager when a lot of this stuff was happening, getting close to being a teen, and then in my teen years before Vietnam ended. So, of course, I remember the treatment and the way people were coming home, which was what put a bad taste in my dad's mouth, and he didn't want me to join the military. He was against it when I did it the first time. He was against it when I did it the second time because, of course, what were we doing in '05?
Yeah.
Iraq and Afghanistan. So he did not have any desire to hear me say I was going back in. But every generation has had to be involved in some type of a conflict, and we're in the longest stretch of conflict we've ever been in now. And young people are not learning, and we have to teach them, and it's good to see what we saw in Pearl Harbor, and I think you saw in one of my videos, because all I heard in my head when I first got there was, because at one point, the first time I did one, I'm like, oh, crap, I got to do this because Rick's going to be mad. He told me I'm supposed to put this stuff live on Hometown
You did
Heroes.
a good job.
And
We're
I'm
proud
like,
of you.
I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, but we're going to try this. All right,
did
let's
it.
go.
You did a great job.
But, well, thanks. But I was like out of my element. But I thought all hope is not lost when you see those young people that we saw during those days that we were there in Hawaii at that Pearl Harbor. And really, I seriously didn't even see the beach until probably the day before we left. I didn't even know what it looked like because I was up early to go to events and we were going almost all day. I was exhausted. The guys were exhausted. It was quite the trip.
And that parade was the last night before you left the next day.
It was.
And then you came right from the airport just about to roll
To
call.
roll
Yeah.
call.
Both,
Yeah.
And
We were
Don
talking about
did too.
Yeah. Yeah, Don and Carl and Clint.
How long was that flight?
The flight was about an 8-hour flight. And
It's a jet lag that really gets you.
yeah, it didn't hit me right
Kick
away.
your butt, won't it?
But Friday night it hit me pretty bad. And I've been on longer flights, and when I flew into the Middle East on my deployments, I always kind of had a process for how I did that, but we were going the opposite direction in time. So it was a process that I never really got myself in too much trouble. But yeah, it was the flight for Randy Stillinger works the military,
We've
stuff.
talked to him. We're going to have him on the show one time. Because he works for American Airlines, and he's the veteran and military liaison. Goes around the world to make sure that our veterans go places, our military goes places, and whenever we have military coming back that have been killed, that dignified transfer happens. He's an incredible guy.
Yeah, he is. And Randy made sure to get those Don and Carl upgraded. So they had first class going and coming. So they were able to lay down and get some sleep. Now, Carl and I, we weren't quite so lucky. But coming home, it was a little more uncomfortable, so I didn't sleep as much. I tried to sleep. I didn't need to sleep going because the hour wasn't such a deal. But our flight left about 8:35 on Thursday night from Hawaii, and we landed about 7:30 in the morning Friday the 9th, which was the roll call luncheon. So then, as I always have to do with Don, is I have to take Don home before I could go home. So by the time we got bags, got Don. I got Don home about 9 o'clock in the morning. I got to my house about 9:30. I'm usually at the luncheon about 9:30. So I jumped in the shower real quick. I got shower, cleaned up, freshened up, got to the luncheon, and then Kelly brought Don, and Carl and Clint came, so Clint brought his dad. So they barely had any time, to kind of recover, but we were all at the luncheon.
And it was a good luncheon.
It was a great luncheon. Yeah.
And then after the luncheon was the post-luncheon.
Yes.
Our
post-lunch at Boomer Jack's in Lake Worth, where we tend to go after the luncheon for a couple of
that was
adult
an incredible
beverages.
trip. And what's so important about us taking veterans places, roll call, is to share them and their experiences with others, but then have people like Mary that go there be able to come back and share that experience.
Share the stories, yeah.
Because otherwise we wouldn't know all this stuff happens. So
That's what's the matter with the public, with general public. They don't know anything about anything with what happened at Pearl Harbor or anything. It's sad for me being a historian to ask people, and I don't know what happened at Pearl Harbor. I mean, to me, it's embarrassing.
it is.
Yeah.
You know.
And I would say that if you know, if you have the opportunity to go to Hawaii, no matter where you are, try to get over there to Pearl Harbor.
Don't just go to have fun,
Yeah.
but go to pay
Yeah.
respect to those that
right.
gave you the privilege to go there.
And you don't have to spend as much time as we did, obviously, at each of these things, but go there with the understanding that this is going to be one of those things that you should see in person if you can. I've never been to Hawaii before. I still could really say I haven't really been because I've only been to the places
have to
we
go
went.
back.
I'm going to have to go back to actually experience Hawaii. But I would say go there, and even if it's not at the time of the anniversary, but if you go at the time of the
It's
anniversary,
an emotional time,
right?
regardless
if
of when
you
you
go, then make it a point to get your tickets to go to the Arizona on the morning of the celebration or of the commemoration, because then you can actually be on the out. You don't have to be on the guest list. You don't have to be in the chairs. There were people that were all around us that were just folks that had bought tickets to go out to the Arizona that morning. And they got to be there for this, you know. And while we were there, we got to see a lot of different things that were, this was in this place, and this is the tower, and this is like I took Don up into one of the towers that they used that was attacked by the Pearl Harbor Museum, and I took him up there to do an interview with Fox 23 out of Oklahoma on my laptop. So Don climbed 4 flights of stairs.
I was wondering what that was
like,
about when I saw that laptop and you all sitting there. I thought,
I was like hoping that Don knew what he was getting into when he agreed to climb the 4 flights, but it was great for the sound. But I had to keep telling him he couldn't hear the girl. I had to tell him what she said, and then he would answer. So I'm sure she cut my part out, I hope. But that was the only way we were going to get that interview done.
Have y'all ever been to the Alamo recently, since the Daughters of American Revolution have taken it over?
I don't think I've been there in at
I
least
haven't been there in a while. It's
Probably
funny.
5 or 10
That
years.
is so emotional to stand where 185 people stood for what we call Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just over. Everybody in the tours, they won't do more than 35, and these ladies are just super at it. And everybody's crying. I mean,
Yeah.
these people paid the ultimate sacrifice, and they knew they were going to pay it, and they stayed.
Yep.
And that's
And
why
like,
that's
I
why we
always
need to
tell
keep history alive.
I tell people, the guys that got off the boats, the landing boats, they were told 8 out of every 10 are going to die. There's nowhere for them to go.
Right.
But the 9/11 Twin Towers, those guys had to know, I got a pretty good chance of not coming out of this.
Sure.
And they could have said, hey, I'm going to keep my 401k and go. Not a one of them.
Right.
They all went up.
Right.
We've
And
got
so
to-
that's what America's all about.
And think of how many rushed to the recruiting offices after
After
the
that.
attack.
That-
And, you know, just like after Pearl Harbor, how many rushed to the recruiting offices?
and that was a time when our country really came together,
Right.
and
Yes.
and we showed the world what America was all about.
You remember everybody flew the flags.
Yeah.
A friend of mine worked at that American flag out there on Jacksboro Highway, and I said, Troy, I need to buy some flags. He said, Larry, we don't have any flags. We got people building them around the clock, all sizes.
We need to have that kind of patriotism again,
Again.
but not on the
Not on the backs of people
Yeah.
getting killed, but
Right.
we need to somehow energize people, and they just don't want to learn.
Yeah.
The youth today don't want to, but there's a certain group of them. One of my sons was a Sea Cadet, and so he came to me one time and he said, hey, Dad, I need to go to Fallon Air Force Base and do my basic training. And I said, you're 15 years old. And he said, to do any of the fun stuff. And I said, what's the fun stuff? And he said, when I turn 16, I want my driver's license and my pilot's license. So he went out to Arizona, went out to Nevada, and he came in top of his class. And so he called me and he said, they gave me my choice. I can go to Hawaii for a week or a week on a nuke sub, and he took the sub. And I flew out
I
there.
wouldn't have.
I flew out there with him, and the information officer said, this vessel has the capability of releasing more armaments than ever war ever fought, both sides put together, ever. And I turned around, and there was a couple behind me, and I said, why would anybody ever jack with us? But my son loved it. He came back and he said, it's great. It's a city underwater, and those guys, the sailors just took him on, and he's in the military now.
Yeah, well, our military personnel are pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And when there's young people that are interested and have a hunger, our military will tell them whatever they want to know.
It will. It's a good story.
Boy,
It was a great show today.
I'm glad you're back with us, and you know, Mary is so special because she works real hard at everything she does, and taking care of roll call. You do a marvelous job at putting it all together. We've got a great board. Everybody pulls their weight on the board, but Mary is a great leader, and she loves what she does. She loves the veterans, and all the veterans love you. And you're special to a lot of people, and we really appreciate you.
Oh, well, thanks.
And Larry, going to the bike drive the other day, Saturday, it always amazes me to be with people that have a thought, an idea, a dream, and then it comes into reality. And you've been doing it for a long time. And
36 years.
I know that whenever you started this year, you work hard. And because I watched you while you were out there, and I thought, man, look at that guy. He put all this together. He had a great group of volunteers, a great group of donors, and here's this line all the way out to the street.
And to look at those kids
even before the sun came up, waiting for a free bicycle. And you made the difference in over 600 children's lives. And to date, you've given away thousands and thousands.
16,400.
That's a lot of
It's a
lot
lot
of
of
people.
bikes. It's a lot of people affected.
You do so much like that. Just like whenever COVID was here and we had the water and toilet paper drive, and we were across the street loading people's cars up with water and toilet paper. But I appreciate you, and I know our community appreciates you for all you do, because you're a great American.
Well, I do it because, it's just in my heart. Some people sit on the sidelines, and I don't ever.
Well, you and Mary don't sit on the sidelines. Y'all are out in the middle of the
and,
field.
and neither does Rick, because Rick's
neither do
everywhere.
you.
I think Rick is like, there's 2 or 3 of him. I think he's cloned himself because he's everywhere.
Dusty and Tyler, they were both out there the other day taking pictures and doing video and things like that. So
And I love seeing the kids that were there that were helping. There were some kids there that helped, and they came. One young man, I guess he was high school. He came over and shook my hand, and he said, "One day I want to grow up and be just like you."
Yep.
And boy, that brought me.
Doesn't that touch you right there? Whenever
that's more than that.
Yeah.
It's. I think it's once you've had a service mentality, a servant leader mentality, and it's just a part of who you are. And most military people, nobody goes into the military saying, "I want to get rich," because we aren't.
No,
we don't get rich. Especially those of us that served before the mid '80s when Reagan actually helped fix some of the pay. You're not going to get rich serving your country, but you're going to get rich with all of the rewards, right, that come from it. And I think that so much of our military members, whether they're currently serving or they're retired or they did their time and they just got out, I think our military members have a servant's heart.
And they never stop doing that.
And you can't get it out of your system.
No, you gotta keep going.
It's part of who you are. And
part of who you are.
That's
there's so many
how we make a
great
difference.
people out there that volunteer, and that's what makes the organizations function. They couldn't function without the volunteers.
right.
Volunteers are special.
And
Our entire board at Roll Call is volunteer. Nobody gets paid a penny. I don't think people realize it sometimes. But we also have the greatest group of volunteers on top of the board that number dozens that come every month, and even outside of the luncheons that are helping. And it's just amazing. So, it's a time of year to be grateful and thankful, and we can't thank our Roll Call volunteers enough. and we every month it seems like we have more new ones. The Daughters of the American Revolution have been super. We have people like Jack and Margaret Garriotta and Becky Dorn and Brenda Lionheart's whole crew that actually make the food, and there are just dozens and dozens of them that we couldn't do it. We couldn't put on a luncheon without it. And in April, we're going to need that because the skipper agreed to host us again in April.
We want you to come to that too.
You've got to come to that
come
luncheon.
to the base.
And he said, if you're going to have 1,000 people, we'll figure it out. I don't care.
I want to
Get 'em
reach
here.
out to Perot Jr. I do some work for him. And, when our fallen go to the national deal, he sends that plane.
Oh, yeah.
That ain't no cheap deal.
Yeah.
I mean, in all of
Yeah.
the families, I mean, hundreds of people.
Yeah, I know Jimmy Palazzoni.
Yes,
and,
Jimmy knows him.
Yeah, they do a lot for his organization.
Yes.
Uh,
And so, I mean, that's a big expense.
Yeah, it is.
And in fact, Mr. Perot, when any big business wants to come to Tarrant County, he takes them on the sightseeing tour in the big helicopter.
Yeah.
I mean, and he does all that.
We've got a lot of great people from the bottom that are volunteers to the people like the pros, the Basses, and other people that really
They just
help.
step up.
They help make the community great.
Yeah.
And we're so fortunate to live in this community.
Yes,
really
we
are.
are.
But it's that time of year when we get together as families. And we have to also remember there's going to be a lot of empty places at
Sure.
those Christmas gatherings, because we don't only just have the Gold Star families whose children have died while they were wearing the cloth of our nation, but in each one of our families, we've got people that we miss. And I was thinking about a friend of mine in Dallas, and it was just about 2 years ago, Thanksgiving. The Sunday after Thanksgiving, her husband died. And 2 weeks later, or about 10 days later, her son had come here. He'd gotten COVID, and he'd been having a real problem with drugs, and he was doing better. But that fentanyl killed him.
Mm.
And I think about people like her that, there's going to be a lot of emptiness. So, while we're having fun with our family, remember those families that are missing their loved ones.
Yep. Maybe reach out to them if you know
Yeah.
them and invite them into your home.
And
We
this,
have a lot of members on my group. We've lost a lot in 2 years. But it's a big deal there's a lady that I'm going to stop and see today. Her husband has been gone probably 11 or 12 years. So I actually got her a little dog, a poodle, and he just passed.
Mm.
And she is just devastated.
yeah.
And so I'm thinking I'm going to go to PetSmart and get it. I mean, she just sobs incoherently, because older people that don't have anybody left, they're so attached to
That's their
that.
life.
And so I said, I'll be out there. And she said, I don't even want to live anymore. And I said,
Mm.
no. And so we really need to be humble at this time of year and reach out to. That's why I tell people all the time, your neighbors down the street, the people that
Or you
live by
should.
themselves. Go down there and knock on the
That's
door and
right.
see if you can get them to come for Christmas or whatever. We're all Americans. We need to start caring for each
We're
other.
all human beings.
Yeah, we need to start caring for each other, and we just don't.
Amen.
It's sad.
And this has been a good show. Roll call is over a month away, so we've got a little break because it's at the end of January. Tomorrow, the Armed Forces Bowl kickoff luncheon will happen, and then Thursday, the weather's going to be cold. It's going to be windy.
And Friday.
And Thursday is the Armed Forces Bowl game right up the hill at TCU. Air Force is playing Baylor.
Dress warm.
They've canceled some of the events that were going to
Yes.
have, the Veterans Village and then the all veterans parachute team. They've canceled that. F-16 flyover is still going to happen, and it's going to be the missing man formation, which
I
you
love
don't
that.
see that very often. But it takes approval by the Secretary of the Air Force and General Pottinger, and
Who pays for that if these fly over?
our tax dollars pay for those flyovers, because we're going to have the F-16s from Carswell. They're going to do the flyover. I was at a briefing last week with the pilots and General Pottinger, and they've got it all
That's gotta
figured
be-
out.
That's got to be tens of thousands of dollars. Or
But
more.
But the best pilots on earth.
yeah,
Right
there's
here.
some great guys. We've got a lot of stuff going, military, veteran wise. But this holiday season, just have an enjoyable time with your families, and enjoy Christmas, enjoy New Year's, and we'll see you next week on Hometown Heroes.